And we'll kind of kick this off. So thanks everybody for being here. My name is Nick Harrington with South Dakota Game Fish and Parks. I am joined in the room here by our Chamberlain Fisheries staff. We've got Chris Lowenhenry, the Area Fisheries Supervisor, Jason Sorensen, and Amy Gebhardt, Fisheries Biologists. And then also with us today is John Law, our Fisheries Program Administrator. So I'm going to kick it off to them in a little bit. But again, as we kind of go with this, feel free to drop any questions in the chat. We will take them at the end. And then we'll have an open mic session too. So a couple presentations to get us kicked off. Then we will open that up with questions. I'll try to keep everybody muted as we can too. If you can mute yourselves, that'll make my job a little bit easier. But with that, I'll kick it off to Chris and let him take it away.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Welcome everybody. This is our second virtual open house or public presentation for Francis Case and Lewis and Clark Lake. Last year it was our trial run and it worked well, so we decided to do it again. Like Nick said, just hang on to those questions, put them in the chat, and we will get to them at the end. But I think that's probably enough introduction for now. We're going to go ahead and turn it over to Amy. She's going to start off by talking about the data that we've collected on Lewis and Clark Lake and on the paddlefish population below Gavins Point Dam.
Does that look normal for everybody? Right?
Good with everybody? Looks pretty good. I see thumbs up. Go ahead, Amy.
Awesome. Okay. So before we get into some of the fish data, I just want to tell some background about Lewis and Clark Lake. It is a 69-mile long river reservoir starting at the top at Fort Randall Dam by Pickstown and going downstream to Gavins Point Dam by Yankton. Surface area is just over 19,000 surface acres, and it has a max depth of 45 feet. Now today, most of the data that I'll be going over is from our gill nets, our AFS experimental gill nets, that are 80 feet long and 6 feet tall. And we place 36 of them randomly each year in that lake section of our reservoir, so that red oval on the left, or sorry, the right. Now, we do not set gill nets in the riverine and the delta habitats. That's just due to they do not sample properly there. The fast water is not conducive to setting gill nets. I will also be going over some smallmouth fast electrofishing, as well as electrofishing for age 0 walleye. And then, like Chris said, I'll touch on some of the paddlefish snagging and archery data from this year. How do I? Doesn't want me to go to my. Oh, there we go. Sorry guys about that. So this is species composition on this figure, and usually we see 3 species that are the most abundant in our gill nets. Now these gill nets are set in September, and the 3 species that we normally see in highest abundance is channel catfish in that red color, gizzard shad in that blue color, and then the tan color is that freshwater drum. I would also like to point out that walleye is that bubblegum pink, which made up about 6% of our abundance in our gill nets on Lewis and Clark Lake. And then that green is the sauger abundance, that is about 7% of our catch from our gill nets. This figure is looking at walleye abundance, and it is showing our historical data. We changed to different nets in 2017. However, this pre-data shows a very similar relationship with annual runoff, with an inverse relationship with our walleye abundance that we do see continuing with our new gill nets. So what I mean by that is you can see the red line is the annual runoff for a given year. That dashed orange line is annual runoff across all years, and then the bars are walleye abundance. And for, say, if you're looking at the early to mid 2000s, you can see that most years we had very low annual runoff, and we had quite high walleye abundance in those years. So moving on and looking at our walleye abundance with our gill nets that we present day use, you can see this same relationship is happening. When you have that high annual runoff, we're usually seeing a little bit lower walleye abundance. And the last couple of years, we've had some lower annual runoff, and our walleye abundance has been higher since we started using our new gill nets. Now, looking at these bars, they're broken up into colors. That green is showing 20 plus individuals. That blue is 15 to 20 inch individuals, and that made up the vast majority of our gill net catches. Then we have 15 inches and below in the yellow and age 0 in white. Our gill nets are targeted towards adult fish, and so those younger fish are not sampled very well. And so we use walleye electrofishing for age 0s in the fall as a addition to sampling with our gill net age 0s. So this figure, you also see that red line that is showing annual runoff. This same inverse relationship, when you have high annual runoff, we usually see lower walleye abundance, and vice versa. Also in this figure, that green is showing natural stocked individuals, or natural individuals, I shouldn't say stocked, sorry about that. And then the blue on the bar graph is indicating individuals that have been stocked. Now, how we can tell if an individual is stocked is before they leave the hatchery, they're immersed in oxytetracycline, or for short OTC, and that marks the otoliths or their bone structure in their body. And out in the field, we pull their otoliths, their ear stones, and we bring them back into the lab, and we can look underneath the microscope and see if there's a mark. And if there is a mark, that indicates that those fish were stocked. Now, we did start stocking in 2014, and we went until 2016. We took a year off in 2017, and then continued stocking up until 23. Now, in 24 and 25, we had a pretty good year class of age 0s in 23, and it was predicted that our annual runoff was going to be lower than average, and so we opted not to stock those years. And we also saw our highest walleye per hour electrofishing those 2 years we did not stock, these last 2 years, I should say, which were above 100 fish per hour. Now, since starting electrofishing every year back in 2008, our average walleye per hour is only about 44 walleye. So the last 2 years are really great. With that also being said, we are planning on not stocking in 2026, and it is predicted to be a lower than average annual runoff year. So looking at walleye growth, this is going back to our gill net data. And in this figure, you have a dashed red line, that is our 15-inch minimum. You have the orange line, which is a 10-year average mean length at age, and then the blue line represents mean length at age of walleye in Lewis and Clark this year from our gill nets. What you can see is the blue and the orange line follow each other very well. I would also like to point out that growth is very fast for walleye in Lake Francis case, and at age 2, walleye are just over that 15-inch length limit. At age 3, walleye reach, on average, about 17.5 inches. Age structure. This helps to determine if there's strong year classes, weak year classes, and even missing year classes. You can see that the large chunk of our abundance of walleye that we caught in our gill nets are between age 2 and age 3. And at the highest abundance is age 3. This is also a very normal age structure for our walleye out of our gill nets in Lewis and Clark Lake. And you can tell that because it's high at age 3, and then abundance decreases as you get those older individuals. This is looking at walleye condition with our gill nets. Our gill nets, like I said previously, they're conducted in September, and so that's late summer. And we like to see our relative weight above 80. And I should explain, your relative weight really means how fat or skinny a walleye is. And historically, usually Lewis and Clark ranges from about 83 to 95, and this year is no exception. Very normal with a range of an average WR of 89. So moving on and looking at walleye abundance, or sauger abundance, this figure looks very similar to the walleye abundance, in where you see that inverse relationship with sauger abundance and annual runoff, where when you have that higher annual runoff, we usually see lower sauger abundance. Now, just like the walleye, the last few years we've had pretty good sauger abundance in our nets. And these colors the bars are broken down into colors by length. So 20 plus is that yellow, is the green. Blue is 15 to 20 inches, and that made up the bulk of our gill net catches are in that 15 plus inches. Yellow is less than 15 inches, and then age 0 is white. Mean length at age for sauger. Now, sauger do grow slightly slower than walleye. This is known across the board, and Lewis and Clark is no different. At age 2, our sauger are just below 15 inches. They're just right around 14.5 inches. And then at age 3, they're about 16.5 inches. Looking on the right, you see age structure. This is very normal distribution of what we see on Lewis and Clark, with the highest abundance at age 3. And then as you look at the older individuals, that abundance tapers off. Channel catfish. Historically, Lewis and Clark has been known to have very good numbers and very good size for channel catfish, and this year is no different.
Do I get this bigger then without screwing it up?
The light blue is less than 15 inches. The yellow is 11 to 16. The orange, which is the bulk of our channel catfish we collected in our gill nets, is that 16 to 24 inches, and then that blue is 24 inches and above. Smallmouth bass electrofishing. We do sampling in the Fort Randall Reach in the fall time, and in the Lewis and Clark Reach in the lake portion, we do in the springtime. Now, looking at both these figures, you can see we have very good smallmouth bass populations, with smallmouth bass being about 40 smallmouth bass per hour in both locations the last year. These are broken down by size if you look at the bars. So green is 7 to 11 inches, that orange is 11 to 14 inches, and 14 plus is that dark blue. So looking at the Fort Randall Reach, I'll remind you again, these fish were collected in the fall. So when you look at age 4, that is technically 5 growing seasons. Also, another fact is that smallmouth bass do grow slower than walleye. So at age 4, smallmouth bass at Fort Randall are about 12 inches in length. Looking at the age structure, this is very typical of what we see in Fort Randall, with those high numbers of individuals being in the younger ages and then lower abundances as we get in older ages. For looking at the smallmouth bass in Lewis and Clark Lake area, now these fish were collected in the springtime. And so when I say 4 years old, they haven't went through that 5th summer of growth, because we electrofish them in the spring versus the fall. With that being said, an age 4 individual, they average about 11.5 inches. And so what this is telling us is that we have very similar growth between the two areas in our lakes, or in our lake of Lewis and Clark. Looking on the right side is age structure. This is very normal distribution for what we normally see in the lake area, with our vast majority of our individuals being between that 2 and 4 years old. So moving on and talking about paddlefish, before I get into the actual data, back in 1997, it was changed from a quota to a lottery system. And at that time, Nebraska and South Dakota decided that they each were going to give 1,600 paddlefish tags out. South Dakota also decided at that time to give 50 of their 1,600 to non-residents, in which they still do today. Looking at that top bar graph, it's angler hours. And what you see is the normal range is usually between 10,000 to 20,000 angler hours per season. And this year was a little bit higher, towards that range, around 1,900 hours. Looking at the bottom figure, it's paddlefish per hour across years since 1997 to 2025. And you see in the late 1990s, early 2000s, it was ranging between 0.2 to 0.4. And around 2004, we saw this large jump in the number of fish people caught per hour. And that was just due to the fact, for some reason, there was a large group of fish that appeared to migrate up into that Gavin's Point area and stayed there for a good while and have tapered out. And you can see that the last, 2-3 years are probably more or less what is expected to see for catch rates down on Gavin's Point Dam. This year it was about 0.18 fish per hour. Moving on and talking about the fish that were actually caught. So the top left is talking about number of fish that were released. So if you don't know this, if you're snagging below Gavin's Point Dam, there is a protected slot limit where people cannot keep fish. That is between 35 inches to 45 inches. And how you measure a paddlefish, if you've never done it before, is the front of the eye to the natural fork of the tail has to be shorter than 35 inches or longer than 35 inches when you're snagging them down at Gavin's Point Dam. So if you look at the top figure, it is number released, and so the yellow is all individuals that people release below that 35 inches. That protected slot, so 35 to 45 inches, is that blue color, and the red is the 45 inches and above individuals that people released. This year, about 3,000 paddlefish were released. Looking on the bottom right, you see number of fish harvested. Now that light purple color is the individuals that are less than 35 inches in length. And that reddishy purple color is individuals that were harvested, that were above that 45 inches in length. And you can see that most years, most of the anglers are harvesting individuals that are smaller than that 35 inches. This year, 321 individuals were harvested, with 29 of them being above that 45-inch protected slot limit. This is looking at paddlefish relative weight, and it has gillnet data on it as well as angler harvest, so when they're harvesting those in October. Looking at the past about 25 years, the WR, or relative weight, really ranges from about 60 to 70, and this year is pretty close to the normal range. So now moving on and talking about archery paddlefish. This is a 30-day season, and before 2016, the season started at, I believe, July 15th, right? And went till, remind me again.
August 15th.
August 15th, thank you. And in 2016, there was a push to try to increase archery success, and so it was moved to July 1st to the 30th. And prior to 2016, success was about 25%. Since the season has changed, it's increased to about 60% success. We also noticed there was a difference where archers were targeting paddlefish, in which we saw pre-2016, the tailwaters was only targeted about 40% of the time by anglers, while 2016 and on, 62% of anglers target that tailwater. I'd also like to point out that Nebraska and South Dakota each give out 275 tags a year for the archery season. So looking at the top graph, this is fish harvested, and you can see around that 2016 that there was a giant spike on average across those years past 2016 that we see this increase in fish harvested. I would also like to point out that this year, 2025, that 138 fish were harvested. Now, moving down and looking at angler hours, you can see that they typically, on average, across years since 1997, are just above 2,400 hours. Now, this year was slightly above average, with just under 2,800 angler hours, or archery hours, I should say. And this is looking at archery paddlefish harvest with sizes. Now, during the archery paddlefish harvest, they do not have to follow the protected slot limit. And so they're able to harvest any size of paddlefish during this season. So looking at this figure, the blue is 35 inches and less. The slot or protected slot limit, if you were snagging, is 35 to 45 inches. And then that black is 45 inches and above. 60% of the fish harvested during archery was above 35 inches. With that being said, only 60 fish were actually harvested within that snagging protected slot. And with that, well, I guess I'm not taking questions. Jason, you can talk now, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. And for all the people that just joined in or joined in after we got started, this is being recorded and will be on our YouTube page, so you can catch what you missed if you care to view it. Also, I just wanted to let the new attendees know that we were going to take questions all at the end, so you can either type them into the chat and we'll address them after Jason gives the Francis case update, or just hang on to them and let us know afterwards what your questions are. But anyway, so we'll move on to Francis case. Jason's going to talk about the walleye fishery there, a little bit about smallmouth bass, And he's also going to touch on the Francis Case paddlefish season.
See if I can get this to share. Thanks, Chris. All right. Everybody see that? Okay, thumbs up. Good to go. All right, well, moving upstream, we're going to talk a little bit about Lake Francis Case now. A lot of the graphs and charts will be very similar to what Amy showed. So now that you're all trained in what you're looking at. So we'll start out, we're going to talk a little bit about our survey design on Francis Case, and then we'll look into some of the trends we're seeing in the walleye population. And then we'll switch gears and talk a little bit about our angler use and harvest survey. And then we have a few slides to update you on some of the smallmouth bass work we're doing. We'll take a look at how that population's looking in Francis Case. And then in the end, we'll talk a little bit about the paddlefish season on Case. Just to start with.
Screens are moved.
Yeah, our screens aren't moving.
Okay. Nick, my IT guy.
Yeah. I took it all down. See, don't call me the IT guy. Then you end up in this.
I know, it looked better than I was doing.
I know it did. I know it did. All right. See, this is what happens. This is why we appreciate the patience with Nick. That's why we very much appreciate that. All right, give that a try.
All right.
There you go.
Yep.
There you go.
Better.
All right, there we go. Sorry about that. Now, well, maybe.
It was slow for me.
There we go. It was slow. Okay. Just some fun facts, if you will, about Lake Francis Case and Fort Randall Dam. The Fort Randall Dam was constructed between 1946 and 1952, and they started filling the reservoir in 52, and about late November of 1953 is when it reached the minimum operating pool. It is the 11th largest reservoir in the United States. It's approximately 107 miles long, has over 500 miles of shoreline. At normal pool, it's 102,000 acres, has a max depth of about 140 feet, and the storage capacity of the reservoir is just a little over 5.4 million acre feet. It did have the record flows through the dam and the spillway and the powerhouse back in the flood of 2011 at 160,000 cubic feet per second, which seemed like a lot, but the dam was actually constructed and designed to release upwards of 805,000 cubic feet per second. So just a small fraction of what it's capable of doing. Our gill net survey on Francis Case, just like Amy said, we conduct that survey in September, and we usually start right after Labor Day, and the entire reservoir is surveyed from one dam to the other. We have 75 randomly selected sites that we place these nets at, and each site is randomly selected differently each year, so it's not the same sites every year. Like Amy said, prior to 2017, we did use 300-foot long multi-filament gill nets, and starting in 2017 to the present, we switched to an 80-foot long monofilament gill net. So the two are not comparable. It's not apples to apples, so that's why we keep that data separate. We set our nets in anywhere from 8 to 99 feet of water. We exclude anything over 100 feet of water, and we don't go shallower than 8 feet, simply so boats don't run into our nets. Because these nets are 6 feet tall, fished on the bottom. So in 2025, our gill nets on Francis Case, this was the composition makeup of the fish we caught, you can see that walleye accounted for about a third of the fish we caught in the survey, with sauger making up another 9%. So between the walleye and sauger, about 40% of our gillnet catches. Channel catfish accounted for about 20%. And then I know some of you may not know what all these stand for. So we had smallmouth bass, goldeye, common carp, freshwater drum, white bass, yellow perch, and gizzard shad. The other category is a host of things, everything from shovel-nosed sturgeon, flathead catfish, big and smallmouth buffalo, short-nosed gar, river carp suckers, lots of different things. Just like the graph Amy showed, here is our walleye catch per net on the y-axis and years on the x-axis. And this red line is the annual runoff into the Missouri River system. And again, just like the other graph Amy had, green is fish, walleyes over 20 inches, and yellow is those fish less than 15 inches, and blue is 15 to 20 inch fish, and the white is the age 0 fish. Francis Case is quite a bit larger than Lewis and Clark, and so we don't see the relationship with the water runoff in our walleye abundance like we do on Lewis and Clark Lake. Francis Case actually sees the opposite. When we have years of low runoff, that equals low nutrient inflow into the reservoir, and we usually see lower walleye abundances during those times. And then when we see high water years, such as 2011, 2019, we see our walleye population respond, and we see an uptick in our overall abundance. Again, that was our historical data from before the new style gill nets. This here is with our new gill nets since 2017 to the present. Again, age 0 walleyes are in that orangey color, I guess, and yellow is the fish less than 15 inches. Blue is the fish 15 to 20 inches, and green again is the fish over 20 inches, with the red line being the annual runoff into the reservoir system or the river system. So you can see in 2025 we were just over 5 fish per net, which over the long term is probably just right at the average, maybe a little above average. I want to make note that don't get too hung up on focusing on any one year when you look at these abundance charts. So what we're looking at over time is just the trends over time. And what I mean by that is if you were to look at 2023, it would appear as some fish just disappeared from 2022 and then all of a sudden reappeared in 2024. So 2023 was a lower catch year, but in reality it was probably a little higher, closer to what we saw in 2024. There's some sampling variability going on there, and it's probably because of water temps or flows, or it could be some other weather event or whatever. On the flip side of that, you look at 2020 and it looks like we had a huge year there. Chances are that probably is overestimating the numbers just a little bit, and it's probably still way above average, but probably a little lower than what it shows. So you just got to kind of interpret things and not focus on any one year, but look at the overall trends. And right now it appears our walleye population is trending upwards. So as Amy noted, gill nets don't always capture the age 0 fish all that well. So we do some fall electrofishing for our age 0 walleyes on Francis Case. And our average catch rate, this is the number of walleye fish per minute, fish per hour over time on the x-axis. You can see the red lines are average, 150 fish per hour of electrofishing, which is very high. One thing we see on Francis Case is we always see consistent production of walleyes. We never have a missing year class. We had a little walleye factory going here, and we always see some level of production. Some years are higher than others, some years are lower than others. but year in, year out, we always produce a year class of walleyes, and more than likely those walleyes recruit to the adult population. Now you can see on this chart, 2025 was one of our lower catch years. It was about 55 walleyes per hour, if I remember right. Now, while that's low for Lake Francis Case, it certainly isn't a low number. That's a pretty high number for, if you remember back to Lewis and Clark, I think the long-term average before the last couple of years was 40 something, 44. So even though this is a low number, it's still a good number of walleyes out there, and we did produce a year class of fish in 2025. And a lot of people always ask us, would Francis Case be a good candidate for stocking walleyes? And this is Francis Case, an example of a reservoir that really wouldn't require stocking, because we don't see missing year classes, and we always see production. If we were to see a couple of missing year classes in here somewhere consecutively, and we see our abundance start to drop, that's when we would really consider that maybe stocking would be a remedy to solve that. But we see, like I said, consistent production. And excuse me, it's not surprising that 2025 might have been a low year of production, given the fact that the 3 years previous to that were average or above average. And so you'll see that sometimes when you have a lot of walleyes in the system, there'll be a suppression of a year class a little bit. So, but again, there's still young walleyes out there. This chart shows the number of walleyes in our gill nets for each length group of fish along the x-axis. I apologize, it's in millimeters, but I highlighted the yellow bars here. This taller yellow bar is the 15-inch bar, and that's our minimum on Lake Francis Case. We have a 15-inch minimum for all months of the year except July and August. And this smaller yellow bar, that's the 20-inch fish. We have a statewide one over 20 on walleyes. So 45% of our gill net catches were 15 inches and larger, with about 9 or 10% of those being 20 inches or larger. And then as you can see, these younger fish back here, we have a couple of good year classes coming up, some smaller fish in the population. And we don't see a big bump of those age 0 fish down here, but they are represented there. So they're out there at some level. Another question we get a lot is, when you guys run your nets, where do you catch your fish? Or where were all the fish at in Francis Case? Well, we catch walleyes in our gill nets from one end of the reservoir to the other. This map here, and this is in September when we did our survey, so this is just a quick snapshot in September. Of course, these fish can move throughout the reservoir, but these big red circles, these are all of our 75 nets, and the red circles are the nets that had higher catches of walleyes. The orange dots are the ones that had moderate catches, and the yellow dots were the nets that had lower catches. Excuse me. You can see that right here, you can see my cursor, correct? Yeah. Right here is about the Boyer area. So if you're familiar with Francis Case, from Boyer downstream to almost to Whetstone Bay, that section of the reservoir had the most walleyes in September when we did our gill nets. We saw fish all the way down to the face of the dam, though. And honestly, I would say the upper end of the reservoir in the Chamberlain area had the fewest fish overall when in September when we ran our gill nets. This chart here shows the relative weight, and like Amy said, relative weight is just an index of how fat or how skinny a fish is. On Francis Case, the walleye relative weights are always between 80 and 90. Most of the time between 80 and 85. That's pretty typical. Now, one thing that can influence this is prey availability. And if you look here, 2010, the relative weight was high. 2019, it was high. 2024, it was high. And 10 and 19 were high water events where we had a lot of runoff and a lot of nutrient inflow and a lot of food availability. 2024, we seem to have overwinter a lot of shad, as the winter of 23-24 was very mild, and we didn't have a shad die-off like we typically would during an extended cold period. And so the spring started out with high prey availability, and those walleyes were fat and happy and were not hungry. And we'll see that later when we talk about catch rates of walleyes. You'll see that 2024, the catch rates were quite a bit lower, simply because those walleyes had plenty to eat. This is our growth chart. This is the length of fish at each age along the x-axis. And like Amy said, our walleyes grow fairly fast. These dash lines is 15 inches and 18 inches. We like our walleyes to get to 15 inches by age 3. And on Francis' case, the blue is our 2025 sample, and the brown is our average over time. And those two lines are pretty close together for the most part. So our walleyes are growing at an average rate. But we're hitting 16.5 inches at age 3. And by age 5, they're 18 inches. Don't get too concerned about this out here, this age 9 walleye, this big downtrend. This was one fish. We had one 9-year-old fish, and it for whatever reason didn't grow as fast as the average. So that's why you see that drop. It's just a low sample size. But overall, walleyes are growing well in Francis' case. And this is our age structure of our walleyes. This is simply the number of fish on the y-axis of each age on the x-axis. And this goes back to what I was telling you earlier. We see consistent recruitment, consistent production, consistent recruitment. So we see a good representation of several year classes all the way out past age 10. These age 6 fish, that would be the 2019 year class, or those fish that hatched in 2019. And that was a larger year class, and they're still pretty prevalent in the population 6 years later. So now I'm going to switch it up, and we're going to talk a little bit about our angler use and harvest survey. Those of you that fish out here a lot probably got talked to by an intern or a seasonal employee at the boat ramp, and they measured your fish and asked you a bunch of questions. Well, this is where this information comes from. Our survey runs April through July. And I'll say that the survey is April through July simply because most of our use and harvest occurs on Francis' case within those months. Mostly May, June, and to a certain extent July. Those are the 3 months where we see our highest use and our highest harvest. So that's where we survey. Since 1995, this is the fishing use in hours by year. You can see these ups and downs a little bit. Well, 1995 and 1997 were flood events, high water events. Same with 2010 and 2011, as well as 2019. Of course, with COVID in 2020, we didn't have a survey. So that was some of those high water events. Boat ramps were inundated and not available for use, and it really cut off a lot of use to the reservoir because you just couldn't get boats on the water. But at any rate, the last 4 years we've been pretty consistent, slowly on an upward trend, but pretty consistent in the number of hours spent fishing on Francis' case. The 2025 estimate was just under 471,000 hours of fishing use. To put that in perspective, from 2014 to 2025, the average is about 526,000 hours. So a little bit below average, but it's been consistent over the last 4 years. Okay, this is the catch rate, our walleye catch rate on Francis' case, and it's simply the years on the x-axis and the catch rate on the y-axis. And what a catch rate is simply the amount of time on average it takes an angler to catch a fish, a walleye. And like I said earlier, the prey availability really shot that catch rate down in 2024. So we were about half a fish an hour. The catch rate in 2025 was right at 1 fish an hour, and that's what the average is over the long term. Just to put it in perspective for you, places like Lake Erie, they shoot for having a catch rate, a walleye catch rate of about a third of a fish an hour. So I mean, our average is 3 times that. And so a lot of walleye fisheries across the country, that's considered a good catch rate, a third of a fish an hour. So you can see our fishing is way above that. Anglers are catching a fish an hour. This is our harvest estimate for Francis Case for walleye. Again, it's the number of fish harvested over time. In 2024, of course, it was down a little bit simply because the catch rate was down. So you would expect lower harvest, but average catch rate during this time is about 154,000 fish. In 2025, anglers harvested 95,507 fish. That was the estimate for 2025. Now they caught a lot more fish than that. They released 350,000 walleyes, almost 353,000 walleyes, which the average number of fish released during that time, again, this is April through September, the average is about 381,000 fish released. So when our crew clerks are interviewing you guys at the boat ramps, they ask you some questions at the end of the interview. And so I'll just spend a little time going over some of this information that we're finding out about this stuff. So we ask anglers, did you use live imaging sonar on your fishing trip today? And what we're seeing, and again, this is April through September on Lake Francis Case, what we're seeing is about 77% of the anglers said no, they did not use live imaging sonar, while 23% said they did. Well, we looked into what the angler catch rates are for people that are using the live imaging and people that are not. You see that the catch rate for people that do not use the live imaging sonar is actually a fair bit higher than those that do use the live imaging sonar. 1.3 fish an hour versus 0.9 fish an hour. And then we looked at the angling parties that are using the sonar and not using it, and what percentage of those fishing parties had limits of walleye. And 28% of the angling parties that did not use the live imaging sonar had limits of fish versus 24% that were using it. Now, one other question we've been asking anglers is, was this a paid guided fishing trip? What we're seeing on Lake Francis Case in that April through July period is that 95% of the angling trips out there are not guided. And guided trips account for about 5% of the overall angling trips. And we also compared the catch rate of the non-guided fishing parties versus the guided fishing parties. And there's a little bit of a difference there too. 1.2 fish an hour versus 1.6 fish an hour for the guided trips. We also looked at the percentage of limits for the non-guided parties and the guided fishing parties. And we see that about 26% of the non-guided parties had limits of fish versus 57% of the guided parties. And we looked at the average fish in the harvest of guided versus non-guided fishing trips, and it was the same. It was 16.8 inches on average in the harvest, and in both of those user groups. Now, just to fill you in on a project we have coming up starting this spring, we're we're going to start a walleye exploitation project. Now, exploitation simply means we're going to try to estimate the percentage of the harvestable size fish that are out there, what percentage of those get harvested. And so to do that, we're going to tag 1,500 fish each year. We have the reservoir divided into zones, and we're going to tag 500 fish in each zone, an upper zone, a middle zone, and a lower zone. So you guys are going to see these tags and these fish you can see in these pictures, and depending on the size of the fish is whether we tag them in the upper jaw or the lower jaw. And then you'll see these signs at boat ramps asking you to report a tagged fish if you catch one. For us to be able to accurately estimate exploitation, it's important that we get tag returns. So we're asking you to please report those tags when you catch them. Now, out of those 1,500 tags, there's going to be, I think, 300?
Yep.
300 reward tags, 100 per zone, that are available for a $100 reward. And so you'll want to report those tags when you catch them because you might win some money. And you can report those tags in a couple different ways. You can go online to tags.sd.gov, or you can stop in any Game Fish and Parks office and report that. All right, I'm just going to talk about smallmouth bass for a little bit. Francis Case has a very, very nice looking smallmouth bass population. Just like the walleyes, we see consistent production and consistent recruitment. And this is the number of fish per hour of electrofishing over time on the x-axis. The light blue is less than 7 inches. The tan color is 7 to 11 inches. The red is 11 to 14 inches, and the dark blue is over 14 inches. So you see that we have good representation of different size groups and different ages of fish every year. It's just a consistent fishery, and those fish are doing well, as we'll see here in a little bit. This is our sample in 2025 from our electrofishing surveys. Excuse me, again, I apologize, it's in centimeters, but I put the 12-inch mark in here and the 16-inch mark in here to give you some perspective there. Again, we have a lot of different size ranges, different year classes represented. We're seeing bass out to 19 inches in our sample. So here's our own Nick Harrington with Lake Francis Case bass.
If you thought the tech skills were bad, the modeling skills are worse.
And this is just some growth information about our bass. So this is the length of the bass at each age. And again, I mean, bass grow a little bit slower than walleyes, like Amy said, but we're getting these fish. Let's see, the green is the average over time, and the purple is the 2025 sample, and they're right there. Our bass are growing at an average pace like they always do, but we're getting them to almost 12 inches by age 3, and we're almost hitting 16 inches by age 5. So I mean, these bass are happy. They're fat and happy, and they're growing good. This bottom chart is the relative weight chart, and again, the green is the 14 to 17 inch fish, the brown is the 11 to 14 inch, and the blue is the 7 to 11 inch fish. And all three size classes of these bass, their relative weights are between 90 and 100. So they're eating well, they're growing fast. Everything looks really good there. All right, we're getting there. We're going to talk about paddlefish for a little bit, and then we'll move on to answering some questions. So Lake Francis Case, after it was impounded back in the 50s, and this goes for all of the reservoirs really, but paddlefish abundance started to drop. And so as a response to that, they started stocking paddlefish back in the 70s, and this was just done sporadically for quite a while. And then starting in 1991, they started annually stocking paddlefish in Francis Case. I think they've missed a year or two since then, but for the most part, it's been pretty much annually. And we reinitiated a sport fishing season for paddlefish in 2012. And at that time, we issued 350 resident-only permits, And then the Lower Brule Sioux Tribe and the Crow Creek Sioux Tribe each issued 25s for a total of 400 permits. We've had a few changes since then. We added archery as a method of take in 2019, so anglers can either snag for them or use archery equipment to harvest their paddlefish. And then starting in 2024, we increased the number of tags to 500 resident-only tags, and the Lower Brule Sioux Tribe and the Crow Creek Sioux Tribe each now issue 50 permits, so there's a total of 600 permits. That's important to note as we look at the next few slides, because the last couple of years are going to look a little wonky, but it's simply because we had more anglers out there. These tags are in high demand. It typically takes some preference points to be successful in the drawing. There's a lottery drawing to issue them. We, on average, get almost 1,800 applicants for those 500 resident-only tags. Well, what used to be 350 resident tags. Well, this is the angler hours, the amount of hours that paddlefish anglers spend pursuing paddlefish. And you can see from 2012 to 2023, we probably averaged somewhere around 3,000 angler hours per year. And this season's in the month of May, so we're just talking 1 month. They spend 3,000 hours chasing paddlefish. The last couple of years, that number, of course, is higher, but remember, we had more anglers out there participating, and so we'd expect to see an increase in use. And that probably about 5,000 hours, maybe a little more on average over the last couple of years. And this, again, is our catch rate, so the average time it takes to catch a paddlefish, fish per hour over time. 2025 was a pretty good year for snagging paddlefish. It was about 0.325 fish an hour, which is pretty good. It's been higher, but a lot of these years it's lower than that. 2024 was not a very good year to snag paddlefish. There wasn't a lot of flow out of the White River where people generally go to snag them, and so they were trying other things and looking around, but the catch rates were pretty low in 2024. The average catch rate is about 0.28 fish an hour, so we were above average in 2025. This is estimates of the number of fish released in the pink on the chart up there, and the number of fish harvested in the dark blue on the lower left. 2025, we estimated 256 paddlefish got harvested, excuse me, which is the highest we've seen since we reinitiated the sport fishery. But remember, we have more anglers out there. And 2024 didn't look that way just simply because we had low catch rates and fish were much harder to catch that year. I'm sorry, this is the harvest down here. I had that backwards. The released fish, in 2025, anglers released over 1,300 paddlefish, which the average is just under 700. So, well, like I say, it was a good year for snagging in 2025. So just a quick summary of what we all went over. You know, the walleye in Francis Case are looking pretty good. The abundance is at a good level. The size structure and the age structure are looking good. These fish are healthy. They're growing good. We're really sitting on a pretty nice looking walleye population right now. The angling use, the catch rates are about average, but with the below average fishing use, we had a lower catch and harvest than we typically see. Smallmouth bass, you know, consistent recruitment, good size structure, and they are growing and their condition is excellent. They're fat and happy, and things look really good for smallmouth bass right now. And then paddlefish, you know, it's a pretty high demand tag to get in the drawing, but we had really good fishing in 2025, and the increase in harvest and the number of fish released is probably attributed mostly to the fact that we had more anglers out there participating. And with that, we got to the questions.
Alrighty, so I'll kind of lead this if that's all right with everybody. First off, I want to say thank you to everyone for. I saw 95 folks on the call at one point. I think we got 78 right now. So just want to give a thank you all for being here, taking in all this information. Just really appreciate you all taking that time to really learn about these fisheries. So that's pretty cool for me to see. So just wanted to start that with a thank you. And if you got comments on ways we can do this, if you all liked it, feel free to put that in the chat too. With that, I'm just going to start with questions. I'm just going to take them in the order that we received them, and then we'll just work our way down the list. But yeah, questions, comments, feedback. We want this to be beneficial for you guys, so don't leave with something on your mind. The only request I would have is if we can just kind of stay focused on Lake Francis Case, Lake and Lewis and Clark Lake, that'll keep it a little smoother for all of us. So with that, we got our first question from Tim Wickman. When will Francis Case reach normal pool? Jason, that came right as you were kind of giving the overview. So I'm assuming this has probably to do with the current water conditions. Is that, and if I'm way off, y'all just yell at me, but when will Francis Case reach normal pool? Jason or Chris, you want to take that?
Sure. So the Corps of Engineers operates these reservoirs for multiple purposes. Typically, we would expect to see Francis Case to reach normal pool sometime in April, maybe beginning of May. Now, that can depend on a lot of different things, such as downstream flooding, any localized events. So right now, we don't have any set date on when it'll happen, but generally it's sometime towards the end of April to the beginning of May.
All righty, thank you, Chris. Next question came from Dennis, and this was more of a comment. Please attach a sign to the docks and post several days before you pull the docks so people don't get stranded like I did. Sorry, now I'm going to kind of work double duty here. Just want to say, one, apologies that happened to you, and if you have what boat ramp that happened at, feel free to let us know on that too. I know we got Jeff Van Meter and our South Dakota State Parks Director on the call as well. Francis Case is a pretty big reservoir, so I know we've got Corps that manage some boat ramps. I think we've got city managed boat ramps, and we've got state parks and rec managed boat ramps too. So depending on where that was, we can definitely coordinate with that entity, whether that was our park staff or whether that was possibly with the city. But Dennis, please don't be afraid to pipe in here via the chat or come off mute if I see at any point too. So, but apologies for that, and hopefully we can get that figured out where that ramp was. Okay, gonna move on to Kim here.
That ramp was at Whetstone.
Whetstone? Okay, thank you very much, Dennis. So I believe that would be a park ramp. So that's something we can definitely coordinate with our state parks folks on. So thank you for that. And again, apologies that happened to you. That is not a pleasant time.
Well, what time of year was that, Dennis?
I got you off mute, Dennis. What time of year was that? Okay.
That was in September, late September, I think.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, we'll work with our park staff, and like I said, I know Jeff was on the call as well, so we'll make sure that is coordinated properly for you. Okay, I'm gonna go next to Kim Ludwig, and Kim's got two, so I'm gonna start with this one. Then like I said, I'm just kind of taking it in order. With the fishing pressure from out of state in the springtime to end of May, why can't we reduce limits per person to 3 fish and put a slot on of 15 to 18 with 1 over 26? Looks like Jason wants to take that question, or Chris will take that.
Yeah, I'll take that. Thanks for that comment, Kim. Let's see. So a lot of the pressure or a lot of the harvest that we see in Francis Case happens in May and June. And your comment was through the end of May. But one thing that we need to realize with, reducing this limit down to 3 is that probably won't have a big impact. Some of Jason's information shows that on our creel survey that I can't remember, what was it, about 30% of the trips or interviews attained a limit. So really it would result in saving very few fish. On average, most of the groups are not getting a limit the way it is now. Also, just kind of as a department philosophy, we try to not complicate regulations. We really want to make things easy for anglers to follow the rules. And as you probably know, Francis Case already has an extra level of complication where we don't require anglers to release fish below 15 inches in July and August. So having a different rule for April and May wouldn't be real effective, but it would also add to the complexity of the rules for this reservoir. All right, Jason, do you have anything to add?
No, you're right. That was good.
All right, and then we'll have some follow-up too, but like I said, just for Nick's simplicity, we're going to take this in order. So I've got Steve Schumacher here. Fishing in 2022 and 2023 was beyond amazing in the lower end of Lake Francis Case from Whetstone down to Peace Creek. It really tanked the last couple years. Any information on this, the talk at the boat ramps was similar to what we experienced. So
I can.
Jason, looks like we'll take that one.
So 2022 and 2023 saw higher than average catch rates reservoir wide, including the lower end of the lake. 2024 was just a real tough year for walleye fishing on Francis Case. We started out with a high prey availability, and those fish they had plenty to eat and just were not hungry. The fish were there, they just weren't eating. We saw that pretty much from one end of the reservoir to the other. In 2025, our catch rates were back to pretty much average, and as you saw in that distribution map, those fish were spread out throughout the reservoir. At least when we did that in September. Of course, we don't survey the reservoir wide any other time of year, but I would be willing to bet that we have walleyes from one end of the reservoir to the other pretty much all year long. Of course, they're going to move around a little bit. But what we have seen with zebra mussels, making the water clearer, and we get some vegetation growing in areas that we haven't normally had vegetation growing. These fish are probably both using different areas than they typically have over time. It's going to change their habits, their feeding habits, their just where they hang out and where they spend most of their time. And it's going to require anglers to maybe change their methods a little bit, change the areas they're fishing, maybe fish a different way as the water gets cleaner and cleaner because of the zebra mussels. Is there anything anybody wants to add to that?
No, I think you answered that pretty well. I did receive a few anecdotal reports from people fishing the lower end this last year in 2025, and there was some comments about fishing deeper than normal and fishing after dark. A couple guys started fishing, doing the night fishing thing earlier in the year than they normally would, and they were having success. So there might be something to the effects that zebra mussels are having on the habitat.
Alrighty, so going to the next question from J. Albert. With the large numbers of walleye being caught in the northern section of Lake Francis Case in early spring, is there consideration to stock this area? Jay, I'm assuming you're referencing stocking the northern end of the reservoir. So, Good.
I can take that one. As I kind of talked about in the presentation, on Francis' case, we see consistent production and consistent recruitment. So we normally wouldn't consider stocking on top of naturally produced year classes like that. So at this point, anyway, we're not thinking that we need to stock the upper end of case or anywhere on case right now. But what I can tell you, you talk about the large numbers of fish being harvested in the upper end of the reservoir in the spring. I know it seems like that because it gives the illusion that it's super heavy use, and it gives that idea that there's a lot of fish being harvested, when in reality, when you look at the whole picture, the whole summer, there's very few fish being harvested in April on the upper end of the lake. I know when you come to the boat ramp in Chamberlain in the spring, it's crowded and it looks really busy, and it is busy, but you have to remember that that's one of 2 boat ramps on the entire reservoir that's accessible to anglers at that time of year. You fast forward into May, especially mid-May to the end of June, you have a packed boat ramp from one end of the reservoir to the other end, and that's when most of the use and harvest occurs. So I understand how it gives the illusion of high harvest in the spring, but you got to remember everybody's at 1 ramp or 2 boat ramps, and the rest of the reservoir is not getting fished at all. Anybody else want to add anything?
All right, so we're gonna go. Kim Ludwig had a follow up to their original question. I get every year the eagles have to eat too, but why do we completely take the slot off during months of July and August? Probably because of hot weather, but being at fish cleaning stations, I witnessed several walleyes filleted around 10 to 13 inches. Can't we put a minimum of 14 on this? The old story, if you kill all the small bucks, you never have big bucks. Same when it comes to fish. So, Chris, you want to kind of take that? We were kind of talking regulations a little bit ago, so we can expand on that, kind of talk more in that summer period.
Yep. Yeah. So Kim, you hit it right on the head. The reason we have take the 15-inch minimum off in July and August is because of hot weather. One of the things that we see with released fish in those higher water temperatures is that they have lower survival. And so by taking that minimum off, that's during a time when we see less fishing pressure and less harvest. So overall, there's less impact to the population. But what we're also doing is allowing anglers to make a decision that if they have a walleye that's just going to die after they release it, or if it's floating, then they have the option to make use of that fish and take it home. So when you use the small bucks, big bucks analogy, by getting rid of the minimum length limit during those hot months, we, instead of killing the small fish and also taking home big fish, the angler has the choice to just take home the small fish that would have died anyways.
Alrighty, so I think, Amy, this one I believe is going to enter your wheelhouse. We've got Lee Reed, and it is a catfish question. Lee, any info on how the Blue Cat project on Lewis and Clark is going, or was it abolished? Amy, you want to take that one?
It is still going, and this year was the first year that blue catfish were stocked, and I believe, quote me if I'm wrong, about 20,000 were stocked this fall.
Alrighty.
To Lewis and Clark Lake.
Thank you, Amy. So now we're going to go to Jeremy. Is there a program in place for control of the Asian carp before they get above the dams? Below the Gavin's Point is really out of control. John, I'm looking at you. Do you want to take that? Do you want to kick that to Chris, or?
I can help with it. If Chris needs to jump in and save me, he can. But right now what we're relying on is the fact we do have 3 barriers out there on the Missouri River system. We of course have Gavin's Point. We've got the East Vermilion Spillway Dam, and then in Sioux Falls, there's some barriers as well. We're really focusing on the information and education there to work with anglers not to move those fish. That's the biggest thing, is not to move those fish beyond those barriers. After they get above those, if they're able to establish those areas of flowing water they can find, they may have a chance to reproduce there. That's out of our control pretty much. The biggest thing we can do is to work with people to help to stop these spread by anglers.
And the short answer to that is remember to clean, drain, dry every time you're on the water. I've gotten really good at saying that.
And don't dump your bait.
And don't dump bait buckets. All right, that's going to take us to Mike Golickson. What effect on fish populations would we see if we closed the season from March 1st to April 30? Chris, that's another length season question. You want to take that one?
Sure. So we get that question quite a bit. There is a closed season in Minnesota. When you talk to some of the people over in Minnesota, it may not be effective for saving spawning stock or whatnot. It acts more like a social regulation. It creates some hype for a walleye opener. But what we really key on here is that we don't have a lot of harvest compared to our busy months in the March, April months, compared to May and June. And so really, if we were ever at a point where we needed to save spawning stock, we would have to address the high harvest that we see in May and June. If we were closing the season in March and April, we would be limiting opportunity and not saving a lot of fish. And really, these walleyes, when conditions are right, it takes very few walleyes to produce more than enough eggs to sustain the fishery.
I would just add that at the end of the day, the take home is that there are more spawning sized fish that are harvested in May and June than in March and April.
Yeah.
When you look at the overall number of anglers out there, the amount of harvest, that's part of the reason. And our standard management philosophy is not a reducing opportunity to fish or harvest unless there's over harvest. And we haven't documented that as a concern there. And as you said, Chris, we don't have an issue with the number of spawners that have natural production and get a year class.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to add was when you look at the success or failure of a year class, there's always some bottleneck there somewhere that causes that. And from what we see, especially on Lake Francis cases, the number of eggs is never the issue. If we have a small year class or a less than average year class, it's typically because of some weather event, probably after they hatch. If we get a cold snap and have a plankton die off or something like that, you got to remember when a larval fish comes out of the egg, they don't have any resources to live on other than the yolk sac from the egg. And so they can live for a couple days, and if they don't find food in that time, they're probably going to die relatively quickly because they don't have any fat reserves or anything to live off of. And so if we have a cold snap and we have a plankton die off, there's no food available for those larval fish. But so that's more than likely where a lot of or not a lot, but the bottleneck is, and not so much in the number of eggs that are laid or hatched.
Amy, while we're round table, are you going to me too, or we've got everybody way down?
Right.
All righty. That takes me to the last question in the chat. If y'all got more questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or after I answer this question, what we'll do is I'll just kind of open it up and we all can kind of pipe in. I'll try to keep that relatively orderly. Oh, Lee threw another question in, so I just was I just was corrected on that front. So I'll go here to Jesse Bean. With the increase of guide services, do they have any restrictions or pay any extra towards GFP for profiting off public waters? So I'll call my own number on this one. So currently, the Game Fish and Parks Commission does not have the authority to regulate, license guides and or outfitters. So that authority currently lies within the legislature. This year there were 3 bills related to this topic. Senate Bill 16 was brought by Senator Voigt. That was withdrawn by the prime sponsor, so that did not have a hearing. House Bill 1122 was brought by Representative DeGroot. That was heard in the House Ag Committee on February 5th, and that was sent to the 41st day, which in short form legislature means the bill was defeated. The bill is dead. That vote was 10-3. And then just this morning was Senate Bill 160, which was brought by Senator Pischke. That was heard in the Senate Ag Committee, and that was again 41st day defeated 4-3. So again, that all lies within the legislative process right now. It would be on the legislature to pass a bill that would give that authority to the commission or pass regulations in and of itself. Certainly a topic that I think we've all seen on social media, all seen in discussion. Obviously, with 3 bills pertaining to that would be definitely fair to say. But currently, Game Fish and Parks does not have that authority, and I would also want to point out that these folks are buying fishing licenses as well. We kind of talked about that in the Creel survey questions. I believe it was 95% were non-guided, 5% were guided. So those are fishing license purchasers. Those are folks that may not have been fishing without it, and those all do go back. All license sales do go back to fisheries management, which includes our stocking program, which includes Dingle Johnson funds, and the questions continue to come in here, and thanks for the heads up, Dylan, too. But Jesse, hopefully that answered your question. But yeah, certainly a topic that's been discussed. Anybody wants to go back and listen to that testimony, SD.net or SD Legislature is going to have all of those archived hearings. You can hear the proponent testimony, you can hear the opponent testimony. So good quarterback calls their number every once in a while. So that was my design draw. So with that, we're back to Lee here. Lee Reed, why does South Dakota and Nebraska offer a snagging season on Lewis and Clark and offer a non-resident draw like before? I believe that would be not offer. Am I tracking that correctly?
I would assume that's what.
Okay, then Jason, take her away.
Yeah. So on Lewis and Clark Lake, the paddlefish population there does reproduce in the upper river portion there below Fort Randall Dam. But what we don't see on most years is recruitment of those fish to the adult population. And so we didn't want to open that up to any kind of harvest when we don't see the recruitment. A lot of times we see those larval paddlefish or H0 paddlefish go downstream and they do probably contribute to the population below Gavin's Point Dam, as they probably get entrained and end up down there on most years. It's just a function of the size of that reservoir with the high flow through rate, and they drift with the water current for a certain portion of their life and end up getting entrained through the dam.
Alrighty, thanks, Jason. And I do feel bad for Cole, Matt, Chad, and Troy here in the Q&A portion. That's my apologies for not seeing that. So I'm gonna bounce over here real fast. So this question is from Cole Oakbreck. Is it a benefit if we catch a tagged fish to record the info, etc., and then release the fish? So,
I guess my suggestion to you would be, if you would have harvested that fish, go ahead and harvest it. If you would have released it, do record the information and send that in. But we don't want you treating these fish any different than you would have treated it if it didn't have a tag. Okay?
Can I add one thing? And if it is a reward tag, make sure you pull that tag off so you either have a photo of it or you can bring it into an office for a GFP employee to validate it.
They say reward right on the tag, I believe.
Yes.
Yep, so you will know if it is a traditional just number tag in which you would get the info from that fish, or if it was one of those $100 rewards. Yep. All right, I'm gonna stay in the Q&A tab for a second here. I'm gonna go back to Matt. The data showed less people fishing on Francis Case, but that was not the feeling I got in 2025. Is there a plan to expand boat ramps and parking? Matt, I'm probably gonna do the same type of throwback at you question, if that's all right. Were you fishing, I mean, kind of primarily here in the Chamberlain area, like American Creek, Cedar Shore Resort, or were you fishing, maybe further down Platte Creek, Snake Creek, Westbridge, Veronic, or even down towards North Point? What kind of ramps were you seeing that kind of increase parking and pressure? And if you want to hop off mute, that's a-okay with me too. Yeah, I might not. I don't see you in the meeting anymore, so yeah, we can follow up with that. I would say to answer that question as best we can, I think that's something that we're always cognizant of. We're working with our partners, again, over in our state park system, with our municipalities here in Chamberlain, with the core up at the tail race. So I think that's something we're always keeping an eye on. And as these expansion capital development projects make sense, I think that's something we do. And if Jeff Van Meeren jumps off mute on me, I will understand that from him. So I'm gonna roll with that. But yeah, any feedback you have Matt, I know we do appreciate that. So I'm gonna go next to Chad W. How is the yellow perch population in Lewis and Clark? Last year, you indicated that it seemed to be increasing due to the zebra mussels clearing up the water. Amy, you want to take yellow perch?
Yeah. Actually, it is even higher this year than back in 24. And it made up about 9% of our abundance in our gill nets. The majority of our abundance that we caught were between 8 inches and above.
And I will add to that, I did receive a couple reports of some people ice fishing for perch and being successful on Lewis and Clark Lake.
Nice.
So not only are they there, they're contributing to the fishery.
Heck yeah. Alrighty, so I'm going to stay in that tab one more time with Troy. Any comments on the big walleye tournaments? Seems like the fishing really goes downhill after a tournament. Looks like we're going to kick that to John. trying to monitor this one, guys.
Read that question again for me, Nick.
I sure can, John. So this is from Troy. Any comments on the big walleye tournaments? Seems like the fishing really goes downhill after a tournament.
I'm probably not the best one to ask if the fishing goes down after a tournament because I usually don't do well before the tournament. But, it's tournaments are something that we hear about a lot, as we do with a topic of guiding and with tournaments. It's one of those things where they're part of the angler base, the user base. We do our best to work on any conflicts with some of the conditions we set out in a tournament. But they are a part of the user base, and I don't know enough about any particular tournament to say that there'd be more impact than if we had a lot of anglers out there at that same time. Now, I think if anything, and this may be one that I want to, you could answer better than me, just overall fishing pressure, how that may affect catch rates of fish and availability of certain sizes of fish.
Well, I know when we do our gill nets in September, that gives us a look at the population after most of the harvest has occurred for that year. And so it kind of is an indicator of what's available to anglers the following season. And as far as the catch rates have effect on the, I don't know how that would affect the
was thinking more immediately after the tournament
Oh,
type of
immediately.
thing rather than an overall population level impact. Just is the fishing harder after a tournament for people?
I don't think I wouldn't expect to see that kind of response. Francis Case is 110 miles long, and a lot of those tournament guys will spread way out. That they're willing to travel up and down to find a good bite. I'm kind of wondering if maybe what you're seeing is just kind of later on in the year we have a natural decrease in catch rates. When the gizzard shad start showing up, it gets tougher to catch walleyes, and maybe there's just kind of a timing thing where while the bite's dying down, it's also after a tournament. Without knowing the specifics on which tournaments you're talking about, we're kind of just taking a shot in the dark here, but that could possibly explain what you're seeing.
All righty. So I'll kind of keep it rolling here. Let's go back to Jeremy. Got another carp question. How about any control of Asian carp below Gavin's Point? The Vermilion, Big Sioux, and lower Missouri rivers are in bad shape. I know you wanted to keep this discussion to the reservoirs, but it needs to be discussed. No, I understand, Jeremy. I appreciate that topic and conversation. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, there's in the Missouri River Basin, there's a concerted effort on the parts of states to remove invasive carps. Each of the states has a plan in place. Our plan would be ideally to use a commercial contractor to help with that. Those efforts, though, would be focused in the tributaries. So with us, it'd be the Big Sioux, the Jim, the Vermilion, if you will. And overall, it's very tough for us here in South Dakota because we do have those barriers that the fish are going to be stacking up against. Of course, they're in the James River in North Dakota. One thing with removal efforts is that it only takes a year or two of good production afterwards to replenish those populations. So then you get into that whole question of, is the initial effort worth it if you're going to have whatever you remove replaced within a few years? So that's something that is being looked at in the Missouri River Basin. Those other places, they've had an impact on reducing abundance, but the fish are still there. Removing them where they're not an issue for people, I think, is unrealistic. And especially below Gavin's there, we do have a barrier, and that's the place they stack up.
Nope, appreciate that, John. And yeah, no, fair questions, Jeremy. So thank you for asking those. Absolutely something we want to answer for you. So thank you for those. Thank you for that answer, John. Dylan Gravenhoff told me about the Q&A tab. So Dylan, you get the assist. Thanks for helping us out there. I'll bounce over one time. And gonna read this from Cole Oakbrook. Sorry, I probably botched that. Just a general comment from a Nebraska resident. Go Big Red. I spend a lot of time in South Dakota fishing from March to December. You and all your staff are doing a great job with ramps and docks on Case. From fun fishing to tournament fishing, it just has a different feel to it with the experience you all are helping to impact with your great facilities. Thank you. So we appreciate that a lot, Cole. Again, pretty solid team effort here with Team GFP. We've got this fish staff you're seeing tonight in the room. We've got that park staff up and down the river across the state. So pretty awesome team to be a part of too. So want to thank you for those kind comments. And as a Nebraska resident that moved here, there's one reason I'm in the state, and that's exactly what we're talking about tonight. So with that, we'll kind of go to the next question. So Kim Ludwig. What's the abundance of gizzard shad in Francis Case, low, medium, or high to date? Jason, I see looks at you, so you want to take that one?
Yeah. We'll tag team it. Yeah, so with gizzard shad, what we typically see on Lake Francis Case is we start out in the spring with lower levels of shad, and that's because when we have extended ice cover and cold water periods, we have a lot of our shad, the age 0 shad, or which would be age 1 after the first of the year. We see a die-off of shad. And that's typically why you see a good bite right away in the spring when the ice comes off. There are those years, though, like 2024, where you had a mild winter and we overwintered a lot of shad. And so those fish were not super hungry in the spring because they had plenty of prey availability. Now, this winter's been fairly mild. We did have some cold snaps there. So currently, I couldn't tell you if we had a shad die-off or not. If we did not, I would guess that there's a possibility of seeing some lower catch rates this spring and summer. Otherwise, I would expect things to be normal if we had a shad die-off. But like Chris said, later in the summer when the adult shad have spawned and those young shad become desirable sizes for walleyes to eat, we typically see catch rates drop off, and that's typically in July when we start to see that. And that's the newly hatched shad are finally big enough and the walleyes are keying in on them. But we did have plenty of shad in the reservoir last summer. As to how they overwintered, I couldn't tell you that.
And we still, it is only February 17th as we have this conversation too. I mean, we could still have two feet of snow incoming. We're not super sure yet. It seems to be getting later and later. All right, gonna take us now to the next question. David H. I am not gonna get close on that last name, so I apologize. Is there any plans to open more shore fishing spots in the Chamberlain area? A lot of shore places have been closed, and old people can't do rocks anymore. One of my favorite places was closed this year because of an ATV tearing the shoreline up. And then, David, thank you for clarifying. That would have been a Carpenter Game Production Area, GPA. So I did not see Mark Ohm on the call. He is our regional supervisor, but I do have a couple of our conservation officers on the call, too. I'll kind of kick this to Chris, but very similar to the parks questions. These are the types of things that we got a pretty big team here, pretty good team. And so these are ones that we kind of take as a habitat crew, parks crew, fisheries crew. So I'll let Chris go there, but I kind of wanted to preface that.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Hey, David, we're aware of that spot down there, and we have flagged that with our Habitat and Access staff, and we are working on trying to find out a way to get some people down there. Like you said, I think there was some ATVs tearing up the shoreline, and so we just got to figure out how to address that and also get people down there to fish. So it is on the list of ideas, and we are working on it.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you, David. Another question here. Jay Ludwig, with the 15-inch minimum now on ice fishing on Francis Case, there are a lot of fish put back with the air sacs out. Other anglers seeing the same and have concerns about mortality. Why the change, and your thoughts on this? Used to keep the first 4 caught, no injured fish returned. Do you see it going back to that again? I'm looking at Chris.
Oh, sorry, I was just taking notes to
you're
double
good.
check on the Carpenter thing and make sure that's still in the works.
We do have some, there's kind of a lot going on in here, just so y'all know. So we appreciate your patience.
So, yeah, you're right. The lower part of Francis Case did have a regulation where the first 4 fish caught through the ice were to be kept. That was removed through the petition process a few years ago, and right now I don't see us going back to that. It's one of those oddball rules that was only on Francis Case, and we see the same conditions in lots of different waters, fishing or catching fish deep, and we don't regulate that deep water fishing anywhere else. So I don't see that happening. If an angler is having problems releasing fish, they do have the option to try to catch fish shallower or try a different area. But right now we don't regulate that deep water fishing. John, do you have something to add to that?
I was just going to add on the GFP website, there is an article that Chris helped us write on what's called barotrauma, change in pressure for those fish, if you will. And there, the guideline is it's basically mortality seems to really increase after 30 feet. I share that information with anglers with the idea at the end of the day they have to decide where they're going to fish and how they fish. And I completely agree with the idea that we have deep water other places where it's the same situation and it's part of an angler's decision how and where to fish.
And for everybody on the call, I did just drop that article in the chat of this meeting. So really good information there from Chris about that about that topic. So if you have more interest in that, I just dropped that in the chat, or you can find it on our website, gfp.sd.gov. It is under the fish page in the related documents section. But again, fastest way to it will be right here in the meeting chat. So with that, I have two comments here that I want to really appreciate. This is from Lee Reed. Just wanted to thank you all for doing this and pushing out some information and answering questions. Need more of this type of information and interactions. Thank you for being on as well, Lee. And then same Kim Ludwig again. Just thanks for all the info. Thanks for your whole staff taking the time. Thanks again. So our thanks back at you. We still got 49 folks on this call, so obviously fisheries management is a very important topic to y'all. So that's just as important. If we came in here and talked, I don't know that Chris, Jason, and Amy would be as happy with me. So just want to say thank you everyone for being on here. Hope you find this useful too. And yeah, if there's ways we can improve this, let us know. So this is our second virtual meeting. I think last time we had probably 60 some folks on the call. Now we're doing 90. So that's pretty awesome. Go ahead, John.
Just a question for Nick. What's the best way for members of the angling community to contact us and submit either comments or questions or concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. So if not just these meetings, but any time of year, we kind of talked about it with the tag fish, but don't be afraid to stop into any of our GFP offices here. Right now we're here in the Chamberlain office, right here, right next to Lake Francis Case. It was teasing me as it was 60 degrees and I came down here. We have the Fort Pierre office. We have a couple of those folks on this call. Sioux Falls, Rapid City, please don't hesitate to reach out. But you can also, if you send an email to kind of our general email, wildinfo@state.sdus.us, that'll get routed to any of these staff depending on what your type of question is. Likewise, you can call our customer service number as well, or you can find the number for your local offices. You can absolutely consider my email open too, nick.harrington@state.sd.us. I know Jason put his contact info on. Amy put her contact info on. Chris and John, I know would be happy to answer your questions too. But I mean, this is a dialogue, right? When you talk about fisheries management, we want to hear from y'all. Those creel surveys are a great way to get involved. Submitting those tagged fish, tags.sd.gov, please do it. Questions you see, whether it's, again, that carp in your GPA as you're out on the water, questions you have regarding you think you saw maybe an invasive carp in an area that we don't have them, you think you might have found a zebra mussel, all opportunities to reach out to us. We want to hear about it as soon as possible. So I just threw out a whole bunch of resources for you all. But stop in, email, reach out. We want to hear from you. We want to do these types of things more, and we hope you find them beneficial. It'll be on our YouTube page like we talked about. And again, we still got 42 here. So thank you all for being here. And John, you asked me a question. You know you're going to get a long answer.
No, that's fine. One of the big things for me has always been, we heard about it from one of the questions actually, I think, was the idea of public trust resources. Our jobs are to be stewards of those on behalf of the public. And the best way for us to be able to understand and to manage things based on the public's wants and needs just to hear from them and have them a part of the discussions about fisheries management topics.
Absolutely. And the other thing I'll throw out for folks still on this call, this is maybe some insider info that I know, but the great thing about the folks that are in this room that we're talking about right now, they're not just working with the resource, but they're enjoying that resource right alongside everyone. We saw a lot of pictures of Amy with quite a few paddlefish. Jason had to pull out the old photo of me when I was like 12, which was last week. But I mean, that's kind of a cool thing too. Is we're just as passionate about this resource as y'all are. So we're out having those same experiences, seeing those same things. So I just want everybody that's still on this call to know that you're talking to a room full of users as well, and that's what I think takes us from the good to the great. So I'll throw that out for this team too.
Thanks, Nick.
Anything? Look at that. That was not a resounding. And with that, Stephanie Dove says it's fun to volunteer with you all too. So thank you, Stephanie. Any other questions? Feel free to bounce off mute, drop it in the chat. I'm gonna do one more check. If not, we'll leave you all to your Tuesday. Thanks for spending it with us. But yeah, if you have other questions, please feel free to unmute.
I have one question, Nick. How long before this would likely be posted for people to let their friends know that it's out there?
We're gonna go and I'm gonna get this downloaded when I get home tomorrow morning. Hole and I are gonna be on the way to Minneapolis tomorrow, but we're gonna find a time to get it done here in the next day or two.
So within a couple of days, this will be available on YouTube.
Yep.
For those who weren't able to make it.
Yep, and similarly, and it'll also be shared on our Facebook page, which is where you all probably saw the info for this meeting. And then it will also be shared via email too. Again, very similar. If anybody's still on and hasn't seen the Lake Wahi or Lake Sharp presentations, very similar opportunity we have, and this will be right alongside it. And yeah, probably within the next day or two, we're gonna have this up and ready. And feel free to share with your friends, share on social media. We appreciate it. I want to give some time. Anybody gonna come off mute? We're down to 30, so I think I'm scaring them away now.
I just want to say thank you for your time, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
all.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And with that, we will leave you to your Tuesday. Thanks again for caring about fisheries management, and let's have a good season. All right, thanks, everybody. Stop recording. Yeah.